Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
So I am joined by Tom Will, who is an incredible poet. I've said it before, I'll say it again. My favorite Twitter poet. Also, he gets the big thumbs up from Dustin Cole, who was I don't know if he was the first poet I ever had on, but he was by far the most important. Just simply because he's cool and he fucked with me. And then I was able to, sort of utilize that cachet to invite other cool poets on. So a shout out Dustin Cole, and you can always check out that episode if you're interested. But tonight, Tom, and I'm really lucky that I got Tom because I mean, I'm a little esoteric e-boy. I don't know if I know Tom wants to talk. We're going to discuss poetry. We won't get into the, magic, but I do think that there's a potency and a potentiality in the word, and that's partly why I love poetry personally. So Tom was kind enough to send me included some of his books and some of his works, and he has some really interesting stuff. And even though I said we're not going to talk about magic, there is a kind of interesting numerological connections, which we won't get into because I promised him. But his latest book is, which I have right here, Tom Will Rhymes, which is about the Roundel as a form. And so I thought, Tom, why don't you, probably better than me, introduce yourself in the ways that you want to and the words that you want to express yourself in, and give people like an idea of your body of work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the intro there. Appreciate it. And I'll circle back to a few things here in a moment. But no, for sure. I'm an American writer, mostly poetry. I describe myself as a poet, although I I always kind of grin a bit at that. But that's what it is. This is my fifth book of poetry, Rhymes. It's out on, not out. It is to be soon out on Farthest Press, which is a press I hope your readers are at least a bit familiar with. As you guys had Dustin Cole on, who was, I believe, the third book that Farthest ever did. And it's an excellent book. And that's also how I found you guys, because I saw you did the pod and thought, oh, this is good. This is very nice. But it's my fifth book of poetry. Like you said, the title is, it's not a joke or a ruse or anything like that. It's a collection of poems, mostly, one page or shorter, and the one device that they more or less have in common is the fact that they all rhyme or mean to, right? It's in three parts. The first part is called A Half Century of Roundels, and that's a form that Swinburne developed. It's pretty much based on the Roundel and Rondeau, two old French forms, which are interesting, and the transmission of how they got to Swinburne. It's a that's a little story there. The middle half, or the middle third, is just a collection of loose forms, sonnets, villanelles, triolets. And then the last half, or the last third, is a collection of translations I did. Some of the chansons, which just means song, really. Some of the chansons of an old 16th century French poet called Clement Marot, who I like a good deal. But back to what you said, which was very pleasant. But you can't, obviously, I can't just let that go. You're like, oh, I think there's some numerological significances in here. Well, I want to know what they are now, or at least I want to know where you're coming with that. So what do you mean by that? What did he mean by that?
Okay, well, since you're allowing me this entree, Tom, I'm gonna take it, obviously.
Please.
So, well, the first thing that stood out to me was like in 2021, you have your collection of 14 sonnets based on sonnet 18. Well, the 5 and the 8, obviously you have to reduce it down for proper numerology, but you get obviously, and so you get 13. So 13 is one of the most significant Kabbalistic numbers. 9 is a very important number for Pythagoras. Obviously, I'm not like a Hellenic guy. I'm like a more Central Asianist. I'm a tantric Buddhist. So for me, we use the 10, but for like we'll call it the Westoid bros, they definitely love the 9. So that always stands out to me a lot. And the 9 actually refers to sort of the subconscious, sublunary realm of the moon, the dark side of the moon, you could even say, where all our dreams sort of percolate upwards, from the mass. So I find that interesting. And I like that you sort of continued them, because it is often thought of, the 5 refers to this power of fire and Mars. So it's often thought of that by building from the 14 lines of sonnet 18 to start a new sonnet, you're sort of applying this martial fire to the sublunary subconscious world, and you're sort of refining and defining it. I don't know if this is particularly true, Tom. I'm not saying it is, but I that is one aspect of the numerology I thought was interesting. Second thing, 2023, your collection Pale Townie, where you take the 999 end rhymes from the 999 line Pale Fire poem and write a new poem in front of it. Well, obviously, this also refers to the Yesodic sublunary realm. So,
Sorry, someone just tried to call me. So the last 30 seconds there, I might have not caught. I apologize.
oh, no
People
problem at
usually
all.
don't. People usually don't call me. So.
No, that's okay. That's totally okay. No big deal. I was just talking about the Pale Townie and your sort of construction of the 999 line Pale Fire poem, and how you would write, you would build upon it. So it's like the building of the sublunary realm, which if you listen to this show, you'll know I talk about a lot in reference to Sailor Moon. So it's kind of like the building of the crystal millennium kingdom. I know this sounds really weird, but it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. You're sort of like building the foundations of the sort of the dreamscape or the imaginal realm.
No, sure, and I don't want it to imply that I'm both not willing and both not able to appreciate those things. There was a time, like you're talking about the 9th station of the Kabbalistic tree of life, and I forget the name of it, but it is the moon one, and then it's in the middle, and then right directly below it is Malkuth and all that. There was a time there where I was pretty interested in it, although not interested, in my own way. I think I read a couple books on it, but I think the one that I liked the most was probably Mystical Kabbalah by Dion Fortune.
That's an excellent book. It's an excellent primer book for for learning Kabbalah. And yes, yeah, Yesod is the 9th. Very good. I'm super impressed.
It's been maybe a decade or so.
No, don't worry. I mean, I know we said that I wouldn't bring it up, but I had to mention it, right? I had to.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I think this is, if there's a way to bring it up, this is surely that. But yeah, cool. Well, I'm glad you liked Pale Townie too. That's the bestseller. Although it's kind of skewed. This one this one guy was like I want to buy like 200 of them. We were like, all right, we'll sell you 200 of them. So that kind of skewed it somewhat. I'm not complaining, obviously. But yeah, people seem to like that one. But interesting, nice. I appreciate it. Yeah. I can't say how much was intentional or not. I had to put it out when I put it out. I do know some people that do their readings, or they do their book launches based on moon cycles and things like that. I think the next book is coming out May 19th. Is that good? Is that are we looking okay there?
I'll have to look at the Tibetan calendar and tell you, Tom, but I definitely will. But why don't we discuss, yes, actually, a good day.
Oh, good. That's good.
But why don't we discuss it's sort of controversial, rhyming in poetry, especially contemporary poetry. Why don't you, I know this is kind of a big question, I think you can handle it though, is why rhyming? Can you make a case for it? Does it work in 2026? I know that obviously you'll say yes to that, hopefully. And why is it important for form?
Oh yeah, for sure. Why is rhyme important for form? Well, I guess I guess what's appealing. Well, there's a lot of things that are appealing about it, but I think what's appealing to the lay person is something rhyming is probably the most immediate way that they can recognize that this is some sort of language used otherwise. You know what I mean? Um, if I just started reading, a book in free verse and there was no, there was just no ostensible devices that were detectable, well, you could walk on by and the layman, the passerby, it would just be language used normally, fairly uninteresting, or at least it would be like that description of ambient music where you can pay attention if you want, or you can ignore it if you want, right? That was it's like definition of it, or some version of it. So I like rhyme because that's the quickest, most identifiable sort of device that lets someone know something's going on here. You know what I mean? Um, if I had to force myself to give a loose definition of poetry, I would probably say it's the use of language that's both unique and memorable. And I think form is obviously one way to achieve that. You know, in that it's easier to memorize something if it has a well understood formal motif. But I guess it's the same with rhyme. Rhyme is another memory device, but it's not merely that. It's not or else we'd just be doing mnemonic device. I suppose you could. I suppose you could do a mnemonic device as a poem, and some poets have done versions of things like that. But it's one way up the mountain. Rhyme, and it just sounds very good. I like it. It's like if you force yourself to keep making left turns in a car,
Tom, you cut out there for a second.
had my hand over the little
No problem at all.
it didn't cut out for like a great deal of time, did it? It was just like a
No,
second.
just like 5 seconds. I'll
Oh,
clip the
word,
space
yeah,
between the words. Very magical, right?
that's good. And I'm notorious for my phone sounding horrible, so this
No,
is
you
just
actually sound quite. It actually sounds quite good.
part of the show, right? But I still feel like I'm not getting to the heart of it, which I'm not sure I can, because it feels like almost like I'm justifying, like to my parent, like why I want to, like why are you gonna study this junk? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's good to find practical reasons for anything that you're doing, and it's good to put, to a degree, it's good to put what you wrote or writing on the stand and kind of say, justify yourself. What were you doing out that night? This kind of thing with language, I guess. And I guess also I like to think it somewhat comes to me fairly pleasantly. So I think if that's the case, you have to consider it, whatever it is. And again, it's not to say that this is, and you've spooned through, probably a couple of the books there, and not all of them are formal, not all of them are rhyming. Some are, are just poems, at the end of the day. And again, I would say too that not only is poetry, memorable and unique language, and those things can help each other, they can be despite each other, they can be some sort of tense partnership, but at the same time, I would say form is really what the poem can't do without, and obviously with a strictly Petrarchian sonnet or something like that, the idea of what it can't do without is pretty strict and fleshed out. You know, but if you take, you know, anyone else's poem that's not a strict Petrarchian sonnet, that's a nunce form, you could say. You know, a nunce form is just a form that you invented just for your one poem and your one poem only. You know, there are certain things that if you remove them, then it ceases to be that poem. It might even cease to be a poem at all. Um, so I would say that's also something else that I usually think about, is that the form is really just what it can't do without. Um, I would say too that I think rhyme and I think meter, and my idea of meter is not too strict really. It's more accentual as opposed to accentual syllabic. Did you know what I mean when I say that? Not to be pedantic. That's kind of
No, I'm following you.
okay. Sure,
I'm
sure.
just I'm on the mountain path with you, Tom. Don't worry
Sure, sure.
about it.
Yeah, but I was just gonna like I'm not writing extremely strict IMs or extremely strict, you know, iambic pentameter. Usually, you know, and again, people, I'll go on pods or people will just tell me this in any capacity, and they'll say, oh, you know, it has a very musical kind of sense to it, these poems especially, but in general, the poems I write, and a big reason for that is because a lot of like music and a lot of like even like nursery rhymes would be like a pretty obvious example. Um, a lot of those are using like accentual, meaning you know, the line is based on how many accents per line. A good example of that would be like shit, like hickory dickory dock. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
hickory dickory dock, right? So it's three, you know, really heavy emphases, and it's, you know, but 2 3, but 2 3, but and then you would have like the mouse went up the clock. It's a different, you know, they're different syllable counts and they're different stress patterns and feet patterns and things like that. But it doesn't sound jarring or odd. It doesn't sound like prose. It doesn't sound like bad poetry. It's just based on accents and not so much based on accents and syllables per line. Um, so that's something I like a lot. And I think rhyme, again, I'm getting back to like why rhyme. Um, I think my particular style, as I'm finding it, um, the combination of rhymes and kind of an accentual, you know, basis for the line, um, is a nice voice, and I like that voice. It sounds good out loud. It's not so bad on the page, and you can find some people that are doing this in some capacity. You know, I think I've recommended Frederick Seidel before. He's still alive. He's a good one, but yeah. But before I totally disappear into forgetting the question, is that pretty close by? And again, that was more of why I like it. I guess I could explain why people don't, and the reason really is people feel there's just a lot of baggage with it. But again, I think there's more baggage, and it's more of a crowded trade. You know, saying that I'll never use these things and I have no use for them. You know, and I think poetic device is a lot less baggage than the emotional, you know, like second and third order baggage that I think a lot of quote unquote modern, meaning this year, this recent bit of time, poetry has. Again, I think if you know, most living poets, self-styled poets, you know, if their worst baggage was, you know, iambic pentameter, that would be pretty, that would be preferable to what we have right now. And I would invite anybody to read, you know, your last poet laureate, Ada Limon. You know, I don't think you know, I don't think rhyming moon in June is gonna help or kill her. You know, it's not gonna make a lick of a difference one way or another. But again, there's a million devices. That's a popular one. Um, you know, it's not as quaint or far away as we think. You know, turn on the radio. You know, listen to, I don't know. You know, I got the refrain for one of the Roundels from a what's his name, Guru and DJ Premier from a Gangstarr song. You know, so
Awesome. I
yeah.
love Gangstarr. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Sick.
from JFK to LAX. That's where I was like, how do I do from Texas to Virginia? And I was like, oh well, you know, he ends his song by saying, you know, you're gonna hear about me from JFK to LAX, and I'm like, oh, that's a nice little thing. I'm gonna do that. So I just did that, you know.
Well, for the record, I like rhyme, although I understand that it's not considered to be the most avant-garde currently. But I think, yeah, I think it's time. I think it's like
Yeah.
cyclical. I think tastes are cyclical, and I think that rhyming is perennial. And like, let's fucking go.
Yeah, and I'm still very wary of like if someone's like, oh, I'm a like capital F formalist, like, and there's this thing now where if I'm like doing this book that rhymes and people are like, like they're gonna realize really quickly like I'm not counting the beans quite as hard as some of the, because there really is like a
Mhm.
like last Japanese soldier like in the verse mines, you know what I mean? Like they're out there still, and and then they go, oh, it's finally another person, for the verse cult, and then they come up to my stuff and they're gonna go, oh no, wait, what are you talking about? This is ill crafted, this is
I think it's more interesting to have something that's like what you're doing, which is a little bit of a mixture of sort of something modern and something a little more formal. I think that's, for me,
for
that's
sure.
what poetry is anyway.
No, absolutely, yeah. I don't want to. I don't want to feel like I'm slipping into someone else's past mode. And again, I guess I'm sort of bitching in my own way about the whole baggage question. I don't know, some things I like that are, big fan of the prose poem, obviously.
Mhm.
But yeah, but and again, I'm getting more interested. I don't think I'm just going to hunker down and just stay here either. Like if you look at all those books, they were each, some sort of constraints. Some of them in a more traditional formal sense of the word constraint. Some of them, pale townie. That was a pretty odd constraint, but I would say
Tom, you cut out for a second, but I'm going to ask you a follow-up. Constraints, self-constraints on writing.
I figured it out. It's whenever my phone shuts off and the
Okay.
screen locks, that's when it
Okay.
dies.
No
So I just
problem.
got to
No
keep,
problem at
just
all. Don't
figure
worry
it out.
about it at
We
all.
figured it out.
Legit. Um, but self-constraints, I think, is a really interesting idea for a writer. And obviously, you probably have thoughts on that. So explicate it for me if you don't mind.
Sure, it's. I mean, I guess there is a certain romance to it, and I can express that, and I feel it. But at the same time, the big thing is I often don't have I often don't have a lot to say. I can't put my shoes on. You know what I mean? Like this last book took like 3 years, more or less, back and forth, and it was a lot of editing in the back the back nine of that or whatever. Um, and that's a funny place to be. It's hard to like write a book and then try and write again. It's even harder to like write a book and then like edit it for a year and like then try and write again, because you're in a very like ass backward, like critical, like niggling yourself kind of mode. Um, so some sort of formal constraint. I mean, I don't know. It's a slump buster. I don't have a particularly
I like
uh,
that. I like that. That's
yeah. I
good.
don't have a slick way to even say it. Like what I was doing this week. And actually, it finally feels like I'm catching something again. I'm not just kind of, you know, just sitting out there and getting little wussy waves or whatever. Something that's been interesting to me is like, at what point does like a rhyme scheme like cease to even be apparent and just look like blank verse? So what I was doing was like, I did this week is I was thinking like, what are like the like upper limits of like losing like a rhyme scheme. So I was thinking like, okay, I'll do like one stanza, and that scheme for that stanza will be like A, B, C, D. And then like another stanza will be A, B, C, D. And you can make that longer and longer. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, you know what I mean? And at a certain point, you're going to get to the end of the stanza and you're going to forget, because it's just one, then the other, then the other, then the other. So it has this kind of ghostly, kind of blank verse kind of feel to it. And I think you can perceive it around, well, two line stanzas, obviously. Three stanzas, yeah. Four is when it starts to get, I think, a little gossamer. And that's kind of what I was doing this week, and I really like that. So I think I'm gonna just try and do that. But again, you know, it just puts you in places you wouldn't otherwise be, and more or less, let's just say for now, the goal of poetry is language, uncommon uses of language, unique and or memorable uses of language. So I think writing constraints are not too far from that. You know, poetry is itself, you know, compressed language, and a constraint is just a way to create conditions for compression, I guess. You know.
Well said. I totally agree with that.
Mm.
Okay, so let's talk about translation, since you said that sort of
Mm.
like profound bar about what poetry, quote unquote, is. Um, why French poetry, and the sort of difficulties of translation. I do speak French, Tom, just for the record. I'm not like you know, my mom's French Canadian, so I definitely have a very Quebecois sort of
Oh,
way of
fantastic.
thinking about things, but like a linguistic habit, colloquial sort of speech. But um, it's exciting to me that other people are sort of embracing. You know, I think back to my high school days taking AP French too, and uh, you know, just like you reading like French poetry from the 1880s or whatever. And translation. What are its pros and cons?
Sure. Well, the cons is it's an entirely new vista for people to assault you from, and it's, you know, you can write a poem and someone can say, oh, that's obscure, or, oh, I don't like it, you know, or, oh, I think it's tawdry or something like that. And if it's your own poem, you can go, oh, well, that's what I was feeling, and, you know, you weren't there, you didn't see what I felt, you didn't see, you know, what it was like, but this is exactly what it was like. Well, if you translate someone else's poem, the actual you know, they can actually do that. They can say, no, I've read the original, and, you know, you fucked it up, something awful. What gives you the right? You know. So that's definitely the drawback, because I'm already, you know, a big wuss when it comes to being criticized, which as I hope most poets are. um but at the same time, that's also the appeal of it. um you know, you get a book of poetry, like a collection, you know. Like you get them big old anthologies you get in college, you know. And this is something that happened to me. My mom had a big old, you know, freshman, you know, battery book, whatever. And you know, you just like flip right to the back of it, you know. And you know, all of a sudden it's like Cummings all over the page, and it's, you know, Frank O'Hara, you know, talking in an extremely odd, you know, mode, a very odd person, you know. And you're like, what the hell is this at the back of the book? It makes no sense to me, but that's very romantic, and that's very attractive. And when I first was like just flipping to the back of the book, so to speak, that was very attractive. So I think the sort of the interest at this point in my career, sorry, is sort of an attempt to get to the back of things again. What's his name? Max Stirner talks about this. The desire of the child is to get to what is at the back of things. You know, the back of the closet. Stirner, who I like quite a bit, probably the last philosopher I seriously read. Is he a serious philosopher? I think he is. Not everyone does, but I guess that's the appeal. Really, is you know, if your own language and your own mode of expression feels too fleshed out and too predictable, God forbid, well, this is like a whole nother virgin kind of territory, that you can kind of explore. And again, the drawbacks are the benefits here. The drawbacks are the attraction. Um, you know, there's this. It's like finding a wallet. It's like finding a wallet with like some other currency in it. You know, and it's like, what is this? I feel like this is worth something. You know. Um, and then there's a lot of, you know, unsexy, untheoretical things where it's just like, well, this one poet I like really loves this one French poet, you know. This one poet really loves, you know, Corbier, you know, or something like that. And like, I can't, not only can I not find a translation, but if I do find a translation, it's piecemeal, and I kind of don't like it. And it might be right, it might be wrong, but something about it is rubbing me in the wrong way. Um, so yeah, the last 3 years or so, it was mostly just, you know, it was that on the front side. You know, these discoveries are things I'm only now kind of getting to, where I'm thinking about it, and people are asking me about it. But from the inset, it was just like, well, this hasn't been translated. You know, Clement Marot is a great example of that. Born, I think, 1496. I think dead by about mid-century. Court poet, real character. You know, time of Luther, Calvin, Henry VIII. You know, Anne Boleyn had a songbook with one of his chansons in it, right? Because she was in the court, in the French court, before she was Henry VIII's wife, and whatnot. Um, and there hasn't been a ton about him lately. Now he's not totally obscure, Robert Browning's first ever poem has a Clement Marot epigram. Nabokov brings him up a couple times in his commentary on Eugene Onegin. Edmund Spencer is a big fan of his, and actually his first book, probably the two best poems in Spencer's first book are essentially the translations of Clement Marot. But the songs also had really insane formal challenges to them, which people might have picked up on in some cases, and some they may not have. That big wine song, right? That uses a technique called, and again, here's a little French for you, poorly pronounced, but I believe it's rhyme batelé, and that's meaning like a bell. So you'll have like an end rhyme, and then the fourth syllable of the next line has to have that rhyme again, which again is a little ghostly. It kind of feels like internal rhyme because it sort of is, but it sort of isn't. But his father, Marot's father, Jean Marot, was a court poet. Marot was a court poet, and all of these little tricky rhyme techniques, rhyme couronné, rhyme batelé. There's like 12 or 15 of them. But by about the time Marot dies, people are like, we're just sick to we're sick to death of this. This is cheap and bad. But I really like Marot's iteration on it, and he's kind of the last and most competent take on it. And it sort of felt at home with things. Swinburne, his Roundel is basically built on the French form, the rondeau. Marot is considered like the earliest master of that kind of established the rules for it. So I mean, even the book itself kind of is sort of an expression of where I was and the kind of the holes that I dug at the time, like having an interest in Swinburne's form, the Roundel, the rondel that was before that, the rondeau that was between them, the triolet, which is also called a rondel simple, because it's another three refrain based, AB rhymed French poem, and then just little correspondences, Marot's poems about the blonde and the brunette, my poem about, blondes and brunettes. So it's the book itself is really just kind of a, and I guess every book to some degree is this kind of thing. It's just kind of a summary of kind of the, the holes I was digging at the moment. But translation was kind of the last part of that, and I'm still very bad. But I can read French pretty decently now. You don't know a word, you make a flashcard. I've got about 300 flashcards now, so I figure another 300 will be somewhere maybe.
Well, everything you said was really interesting. Thank you, Tom. I know that was kind of not a curveball, but not necessarily the chronological. It was chronopoetic, we'll say. But I have actually a more direct question about Marot. Vulgarity in poetry. Since you brought up the blonde and the brunette, I thought, well, why not?
Yeah.
How important is a little cheekiness in both contemporary and more formal traditional poetry, but particularly
Sure.
the rondel?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's so perennial. I mean, and again, the term Frank literally comes from the word Frankish. Like a Frenchman was considered Frank because he was Frank. That's considered like a national identity, and you can see that in the earliest, great French poet, Francois Villon, who's, two major poems are basically him writing a will and testament out when he's in jail awaiting execution for killing someone or stealing stealing things from a church or a sacristy or something like that. But yeah, I mean, a sort of cheekiness is kind of as perennial as reactions against it in poetry, I would say. And obviously it does get to a point, where I try and not consider, like a punchline as a poetic device. You know what I mean? But I enjoy puns. Some people think puns are going to last better than, because of the way language shifts, they think that puns are going to last longer than rhymes will. I think Jack Spicer said that. But I've always enjoyed it. I enjoy, and I think it goes with the style I do too. That accentual, rhymey kind of lightness. It has a bit of pleasure to that. It has a bit of, it is you do a feminine rhyme. You rhyme, flower and power. Things like that. They're going to have a little bit of a, even that takes you so far out of normal language. It's as perennial as reactions against it. I'm not one of these great books types where if you save up 10 covers of Imprimis magazine and mail them to Hillsdale College, they'll send you Milton and the great books abridged, and then you'll be a great writer. And no, yeah, the flower is not terribly far from the dirt as far as on me. We're at 20% now, but no, and the stuff I do mostly is like lyric. It's less than a page. That's my working definition of lyric poetry is poetry less than a page. And I think that's a good mode for it. I'm not sure if I could write a crass epic. I could try. I might one of these days. But
Well, I personally love your Twitter poetry, as I mentioned, and I do associate you with maybe not a crass poetry, but a little bit cheeky. That's how I would personally characterize it. Definitely, there's a funny subtext always to what you have to say, and I do associate it with your style just more broadly. So I appreciate it, and I always think a well-timed pun. Um, it's kind of the best kind of autopoiesis, in my opinion.
yeah, no, I definitely agree. One more of those fussy that school that Marot was from was called the Grand Rhetoricians, basically, and yeah, one of those things was just called rhyme equivoque, just like equivocal rhyme, which would be like 1-1, CC, things like that, and they thought that was just the best thing ever, and I guess there's other ways of saying that. I think the French also call that rhyme riche, more or less. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, and it's I don't know. I guess you could do it both ways. You could be 70% serious and 30% light. And that kind of helps both. Or you could do it the other way around. I guess I'm more the other way around. Um, but that's just large. It's just that's largely just downhill from mood, really. I'm not sure how much I can affect mood personally.
Well, I think that actually goes into my next question, which is about sort of the MFA complex, and does it make you a better writer? This is a very loaded question. I totally get it. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say, but I want you to spin at least a couple bars, Tom, about that, and sort of like what your thoughts on it are, and do you think it is sort of like the last bastion of contemporary American poetry, or maybe the graveyard of American contemporary poetry, or whatever you want to say on it?
Well, first off, I only have a bachelor's here, not in poetry, but so but again, you know, I would find it interesting. I wouldn't mind doing it. I know people that are very good writers that came out of MFA programs, and I'm sure that we've rejected a ton of poems from Farthest Heaven, poets, books from Farthest Heaven, poems, books from back in the day when I edited Apocalypse Confidential, and those people probably spent more on education than I spent on rent my whole life or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. It seems horribly. It just seems horribly removed from everything, really. Um, it's removed, and it doesn't. You know, I mean, the the stakes are so low as it is currently with poetry, and I'm talking about this in just the purest, crassest, New York Times bestseller. A poet's famous when they're famous outside of poetry. And that's I was listening to a reading by, who was it? Auden. God, it was a reading by Auden. Like a century ago or something. Well, a little less than that, but that was the attitude at the time. Then was Auden is a famous poet because he's famous outside of poetry circles, which are small and circumspect and low in the stakes. So I don't know. Someone at some point was talking about academic art, and they said it is better that they are trapped in there. And I kind of feel like that sometimes. I think a lot of them are yeah, like you said. I think you said ossified. I think a lot of it is terribly ossified, and I do resent a lot of it, because I think a lot of them are bad, and I think a lot of them don't think they're bad. I think a lot of them think they're good. And when you edit, for a magazine, very very quickly, so when you edit for a magazine, you see the crowded trades pretty plain and simple, because you read 100 pages of 100 different people, and you kind of see again what the current baggage is. Um, no, I don't know. It's good. It's bad. I would like some money. Every time I see stuff coming out, and it's from the MacArthur, it's from the Penn, it's from the this, or it's from the that. I'm reminded of something my grandfather used to say. He would say, "It's amazing what people would rather have than money." Um, you know, um, as Franco Harris said, it's hard to write a poem. It's better than the movies. I've probably seen more movies than read books of poetry. Um, and again, and it's not, I too dislike it or whatever, right? But I don't know. There's some good, there's some bad. Again, I do think largely, if we try and be a little more benevolent about what a school is supposed to do and what it's supposed to preserve and transmit, I'd probably be somewhere in the more fuddy-duddy Harold Bloom kind of school of things. Not quite so fuddy-duddies. I think nothing important happened after Wallace Stevens, who I love, my favorite poet. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's serving its best purpose. I don't know how to fix it. I mean, it really does seem kind of you like chemo, where you just kind of kill everything, and you hope that the good survives. But I am fairly removed from it, so I don't have too much. I don't have too many dogs in the fight. No, a dog I do have the fight is Dustin. Dustin's been trying to get into an MFA program in Canada. God help you guys in that godforsaken country. But I've read the stuff he was trying to get submitted for an MFA program, and it's some of his best poems, and God knows, just sit. Did it again. To fly for wall for what that school actually takes in, and I can guarantee you, it's bad. Full stop. Um, Actually, speaking of Dustin, some good news here. We're probably going to have ourselves a reading for this book of mine when it comes out in New York, and we're fingers crossed. We've just about got a date secured, and this is going to come out sometime, May, June, I would imagine. So it'll be announced by then, and all that good stuff. But yeah, we're probably going to have. I don't know if the last time Dustin had or ever did a reading stateside, but yeah, it's going to be a big deal, I think, for me at least personally. We're going to have a nice big reading here. So which I'd take over. I'd take that over an MFA any day. But
I agree with you.
I'm
I
meandering
think
here.
that, yeah, I think it should be there's something very, I know this is kind of against the elite theory of that's popular sometimes on the whatever the dissident crowd on Twitter still is, but I kind of think that poetry, with its like lyrical and sonic qualities, is best performed to a public that is not just fans of poetry necessarily, but just a general public. I think people are very capable of hearing, listening, and understanding.
That's
Personally,
true. That's true. And that would have been a much more elegant answer for you asking why I prefer rhyme and why I prefer form. They are much more conducive to they are much more conducive to reading them out loud. I think Pound said, poetry, gets worse the farther it gets away from singing, and singing gets worse, and music gets worse the farther it gets away from dance, right? And I think at a certain point, Charles Olson said that, as a poet, he's trying to dance in his chair, and I guess I'm somewhere in that school. And again, I think academic poetry, or the study of poetry, it has to admit a sort of, you know, latency. it's never going to quite be. And maybe that's the problem. It's, an MFA program is relatively new in the scheme of things. It's teaching you how to write. It's not teaching you, what writing is in terms of a historical context. I don't, like I tell people I'm reading like Browning, and they look at you like you're, I don't know, reading, reading Beowulf, like, oh, how déclassé, that never take a class that teaches Beowulf, this kind of shit. And at the same time, I'm not particularly canonized. I really do dig my own holes. I haven't read Moby Dick. I should. I want to.
I haven't read Moby Dick. Full disclosure.
There you go. That's okay. Okay, we're all free and clear now with that. But yeah.
Okay, well then my I guess last question before we sort of like see where we end up is the alt-lit scene. I know you mentioned APcon. Obviously, I'm a big fan. I love APcon, and I love like a lot of the writers associated with it. Of course, Dustin always says that his online lit publishing days are over, but I still hold out some hope sometimes. But I want to ask how important it is. How much do you think it supports the quote unquote scene? And is it an avenue for lesser known poets and prose writers to sort of build their writing identity, and also like practically, like, is it going to borrow something you said about MFAs, is it actually going to teach you how to write through the process of like writing, submission, and sort of redaction or refinement?
I think it teaches you something, just like an MFA teaches you something, but I wouldn't say that's necessarily going to be how to write well. It'd be nice if it would always, but it's not always the case. But again, I think it's a cheaper education. It's certainly a cheaper education than going to school. I'd say the best thing you can do is start your own magazine, and then all of a sudden, you've got to really hone in your aesthetic sensibilities, because you're going to have 100 people going, why do you not like this? I thought this was really good. But that being said, I'm, when people ask if I have some love of a community, or if I acknowledge a community, no, I have no interest in it whatsoever. No interest in whatsoever. But it's not what I'm waking up worrying about in the morning. And usually when somebody says community, they're about to, shake a cup under your nose. They're about to, try and get you to sign a petition, or they're about to try to tell you that somebody's a, mad, bad, and dangerous to know, or something like that. So the term is a little debased probably at this point. But no, I like to think that Farthest Heaven, and that's kind of why we're, if I could talk well of ourselves here for a minute, I think that's why we're distinguishing ourselves somewhat, from the design of the books, to the content of the books, to the the group overall. And I think a lot of people don't get it yet. They're like, what do you guys all have in common? What's the main thing here? And it's like, to me, it's fairly obvious, albeit maybe a little hard to define literally, and a little imperceptible. And obviously it's changing here. We're doing a bunch of fiction now. And everybody, has their own, local pride, and their own magazine, and their own, local flavor. But yeah, I don't know. I think we're doing it a little bit differently. And I think, wait and see, wait and see, I feel like I sound like the CEO of Papa John's right now. He's like, wait and see. He's not a pizza man. But yeah, I don't know. I like to think we've kind of done our own thing. But it's still pretty varied, I feel like. It's going to be an interesting year here. We're going to do this one, obviously, but the next three novels, it's all novels after this. I think that'll kind of give people a better idea of it. Poetry, sometimes it's hard to have an aesthetic sensibility. And again, at the end of the day, I'm not even sure if I even believe myself when I say that, almost every school, like, oh, it's to this school, it's to that school, it's the black, it's usually, it's usually non-self-applied, and it usually is just a attendance list of who happened to be there at the time. And then you sort of shoehorn in the sensibilities to that. So I'm rambling. I don't think I answered it particularly well. I'm curious what you think the actual defining or associative factor is for Farthest Heaven. Does it seem to you to have a sort of book to book coherence, at least for me to Dustin or something like that?
Absolutely. For me, it does, but I would call it a vibe. I'm maybe not as erudite as you, Tom, but I would say that there's a vibe. All the books that I've seen that like Gnome, I don't know exactly what it is. I can't qualify it. Maybe can't even quantify it. But to me, there is an aesthetic sensibility. I think it's lyrical. I think it's contemporary, and I think that it is fresh. To borrow something from Gangstarr, I think it's very
Sure.
fresh, and
Yeah,
I like it. It's of the streets, but it's not gritty or dirty.
yeah, and if you want the gritty or dirty, you can find a million, alt-lit things that are, styling themselves as, whiskey-soaked lullabies or some, this sort of thing. And that's every other outfit, it seems, at times, and I don't much care for that. Yeah, I like the lyricalness of it. I think a couple people pointed out that we all sort of have some affinities to the early moderns, to imagists and things like that. And I think that's definitely true. So I'm glad that some people are even if we don't have a name for it yet, and God help us if we do, it might be a horrible name. But I'm glad that people are seeing a sort of coagulation.
It's like all like all writing movements, all literary movements. I think it takes time. Maybe it takes actual time, like time passing, to sort of define what the contours of a quote unquote scene or movement really is. It's not something that happens in the
In real
contemporary
time.
movement, right? Exactly.
No, I agree. Again, we can talk about schools or MFAs or other magazines, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, poetry is sort of writing with the idea of your dead. It's sort of writing. It's sort of the dead talking to the dead.
I love that.
Yeah. If you ever want to read something really interesting, and I'm curious if you have already, the poet Jack Spicer gave a lot of really interesting lectures in Canada. I will point out, up in Vancouver, I think. I think they're collecting a book called The House That Jack Built. He had a really interesting idea. He had a really interesting idea about what the nature of poetic inspiration was and what your role as a poet was toward the inspiration, to the point where he basically described it as sort of like the radio in Cocteau's Orpheus film, if you've seen that, where this poet's just getting like radio signals and writing them down. But a good deal of Spicer's talk is talking about, how the most important thing is sort of getting your own personal furniture, his word, out of the way of this, Martian signal is what he calls it at times. So he was a real character. I think he even lived with some of those real esoteric types there for a while. I think he lived with Philip K. Dick for a little while in California. He had you can still find it too. He did a workshop, I think, called something about poetry and magic, and I think you would really get a kick out of that. And I'm curious what you would think of that. I'll send it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate that. And let me just say, like, I actually like Jack Spicer because he taught.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
not.
So you know.
Yeah, I'm familiar. I'm not like I'm not like one of these guys who's like, oh, I've been writing my whole life, but it's more like my own praxis. It's not. I've never thought of it as like a project for consumption. So but I read a lot. And I think that is what informs me the most, just personally. So I love that you brought up that he has like this, we'll call him a mystic rather than a magician, but perhaps. But I love, one of the scholars talks about him in relation to like the poet outsider. And so I always have identified with that archetype. And even your question a little previous about Farthest Heaven that's how I feel about it. There is kind of a cool outsider. It's not exactly the people who necessarily coalesce around quote unquote alt lit. It's actually like a little more refined. It's it's cool. The vibe, like if you want to use like a McLuhan-esque sort of like,
Sure.
I like that, a cool vibe, like surfing. Like even though it's like more New York, I know you're in New York, but I
Oh,
always think of it as like it's something very LA about that, like cool LA, 1985. You're in Venice Beach, you're gonna go surfing and you're gonna skate. That's how
no,
I
and
feel.
that's something I've seen in real person too. Like we did this reading in DC, which was fantastic, which was a really great reading we did. Just like 80 people there, just like an unmitigated like surprise. And a part of that surprise was the people there themselves didn't necessarily know each other. And I must have, puttered around here between the readings and afterwards. And I must have popped up to the same conversation like half a dozen times of one person asking somebody else, like, how did you hear about this? How did you get here? And I think that's kind of the, everyone feels like they kind of stole off and found something by chance or something like that. And there was no real discernible like on ramp, but all of a sudden you have all these people kind of here. So yeah, no, I've definitely picked up on that. Like, like I saw it happen, like it's really something. Um, but yeah, LA, we got to come out to LA sometime. Got to come out to Canada sometime.
Vancouver. I'm a Vancouver kid, so like
Oh, I see.
West Coast for life. Um, Obviously, I love that. I think that that, I mean, that's the vibe. It's like, I mean, yeah, William Gibson kind of lost his mind, but like he teaches at the MFA program at UBC, and it is what it is. But it's the kind of the vibe, so we just go with it. Um, Let me ask you one last question, Tom, before I let you plug. I know I said I would keep you 45 minutes only, but
No,
you've
this is
been
good.
really
This is
great.
this is
This
a
has
good.
been
It's a
okay.
good.
Okay,
It's a
awesome.
good little stretch we did.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you're happy. I'm very happy myself. So thank you so much.
Oh,
Um, Farthest Heaven. I love the name. I really do. I'm not saying it because I have no aspiration for anything. I personally love the name. For me, it has like Gnostic or Noetic undertones. But I want to ask you like about the meaning. I know like Bill's not here to like kind of give like his version, but
the
I want to
Whitney.
ask
No,
you
no.
about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I know largely it's from the Bible. I think it's a passage that comes up in I think both the Old and New Testaments. Bill would have the chapter and verse for you. He's a good Methodist. But yeah, I believe it's usually brought up in context of giving a sense of distance, like a sense of infinite distance or a sense of something very far from you. Saying that this will be a blessing or this will occur or this will be beyond these things will occur in the context of this sort of impossible distance, this farthest heaven, the farthest reaches of the farthest reaches. um, and I think even like if you go to like Fowler's modern usage, the distinction between furthest and farthest is for comparable actual distances, and furthest is for I think less comparable imagined distances. So I kind of like that. It kind of feels like you could think of Zukovsky talking about poetry is lower bounds speech and upper bounds music. I think is what he said. I hope I said that right. But I do think of poetry, and the idea of what is poetic is sort of an asymptote. Sort of approaching a farthest heaven, if you would. So yeah, I'd say that's kind of what it means for me.
Well, if it's okay with you, Tom, I just want to end on a little, before I let you plug, I want to end
Sure,
on a little Kabbalistic note, just because I
sure.
think it kind of goes along with what you're saying. So my theory is that there's a Sephiroth called Hokmah, which means wisdom.
Hmm.
And it's considered like a gray, sort of smoky place, you could say. It's often described as a graveyard, a sort of place where wisdom is unmanifest in the world. So nothing can really happen there. But my thinking is that if you understand how the tree works, because the tree is supposed to leave dynamic, is
Hmm.
that actually poets, who would be at Hode, or like much closer to our reality at Mercury, if you want to use a gross planetary
Hmm.
sort of example, they're actually drawing from this unmanifest wisdom, Hokmah. So in a way, you are almost at the crown, you're almost at Kether, and you're almost, if you want to like use a very Gnostic kind of framework, you're almost at the gate to hyperspace. So you're almost like outside the cube, but you're not quite, but you're able to see kind of the contours of what all that is. And so a poet's role is to sort of remake the words, the primordial words, if you even want to call them that, from the sort of flux or the sort of like leftovers
Mhm.
of whatever is up there. So all the words have been already spoken, but it's up to you guys to sort of remix them like I don't want to call you divine DJs, but something like that. And so you're supposed to do greatest dance hit compilations,
No,
edits.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, I think the thing right above a poet's head is usually something. You said gray and dusty or cloudy. Yeah, I would say nebulous. That's you're
Nebulous.
describing. Yeah, you're describing quite literally a nebula, and I think the poets combine some of those things, and they're still above Earth, certainly, But I can't think of who said it, but poets kind of they rediscover or they re-unearth the finer edges of words, and again, the words are already there, so you could call that remixing or retrenching, or spelunking or something like that.
I like that.
But yeah, but I agree. Yeah, it's and again, I think there's sort of a Stirnerite ego thing where I think a star in some ways is its own ego, and it's not necessarily responsible for the material, but it is in some ways, or it's more responsible for how it's holding it together. Yeah, it's a good place to stop, I think.
That's a great place. Okay, Tom, please plug your Twitter, your books, and I will include
Oh, yeah.
everything, including the links, and of course I will tag Furthest Heaven in all the IG and
Yeah,
all of that. So make sure that
for
we
sure.
get it out. I know from working with Dustin that he taught me the ways. So I'll make sure that all your
It's
stuff
good to
is
plug.
included in the show notes. And I'm really happy that you agreed to do this. We really went really amazingly. I think for me, I was like a little nervous, to be honest, but I think it
Oh,
turned out really great. And thank you so much, Tom. Appreciate it greatly.
no, absolutely. Yeah. Happy to be here. Love the questions. Really. I appreciate it. Not the average questions. Definitely. I liked them.
It's not the average
Yeah,
podcast. That's okay.
not at
That's
all.
okay though.
Not at all. Not at all. Not the average bear, as my mom would say. No. But yeah, quick plug. Yeah. Find me on Twitter. It's Tom Will. It's Tom Will and a bunch of stuff behind it. So I just say find Farthest Heaven. It's just at Farthest Heaven. Everybody's plugged all over the Farthest Heaven page on Twitter. It's at Farthest Heaven on Instagram. If you want to email me, if you want a review copy of a book or something like that for a review, you can email me at willtom@protonmail.com. Reach out, say hi. You can pre-order my new book. It's coming out May 19th. You can still pre-order it now. Although when this comes out, it'll probably already be out, so you can just order it. It's all physical stuff. Bill's got all the books sitting in his house, so the more things you order, the more you'll save on shipping, especially if you're in Canada. God bless you. That's a horrible arrangement for trying to ship. We're working on that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I get it. I totally get it.
And if you're in New York, we're going to have a reading in all likelihood on June 26th. Most likely going to be at Pub Key, New York, unless things go horribly wrong, but I'm 99% sure that's going to happen. So if you're in New York, come meet me. We'll definitely have a bunch more books and a bunch more readings coming out throughout the year. So yeah, your best bet is just follow Farthest Heaven on Twitter, and we'll see you there. All right.
Awesome. Everybody go check that out. Buy Tom's book, buy Dustin's book, support all the Farthest Heaven writers. I consider myself a friend of Farthest Heaven, just by proxy,
You surely
not
are. You
from.
surely are.
But I appreciate it greatly that you guys have been cool with me and able to come on. And I know it's a little Kabbalah and kind of esoterica, but I think there's a happy marriage between the word and magic. So
Oh, there
that's why I
surely is.
love it.
There surely is, and I just didn't want to embarrass myself with
You
trying to
didn't at all.
remember what I was reading 10 years ago. But no, absolutely, I think it was a great line of questioning. I think that would definitely, I think that John Stancliffe's book would definitely be beholden pleasantly to some of those angles you're looking at.